Hey, this is RockMan. Welcome back to RockMan Reads, a Freakin Book, where DK left off. Today I'll be reading chapters 33 through 35 of Jedi by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 33. The positively jubilant expression on Booster's face reminded me of previously painful situations where he'd managed to find a way to embarrass me in front of my wife. Since there were no other witnesses in his office, however, I suspected that look of malevolent glee was reserved for someone else. He waved me in toward his desk. "Come on, I have something here." As I approached, he hit a button on the small data pad on which he worked, and a hollow projector popped up the image of a Corellian Corvette. This image comes from the data you pulled in while taking the Tinted Blue 7 out of the ambush. The Identify Friend-Foe transponder tagged this ship Captain's Ladder. I nodded. "I'm with you so far, but I have to note that particular IFF signal was undoubtedly used for that run alone." "Why don't you just tell a Hutt how to smuggle spice?" Booster looked up at me through the hologram, his eye rolling toward the ceiling. "Son, I was swapping out IFF transponders on ships before your father even thought about having kids. As you know, IFF isn't the only way to identify a ship. The readings you got here were good enough that my people managed a spectral analysis of the ship's sublight ion exhaust. If you get a good reading, and these were very good, you can get a fairly unique analysis for the ship, and that can be matched against other ships' data to pick out a match. And you found one?" Booster nodded and hit another button on his data pad. Another image of the Corvette appeared beside the first, with both of them slowly rotating to show off every detail. "It's the backstab." I closed my eyes for a second. The name's familiar, but I can't place it. The Etermin Bativ pirates, operating out of the Cumin system, owned her. They got busted up in an Imperial operation. Fewer than 300 out of the 8,000 pirates in the gang survived the imp strike. Jacob Niv, the backstab's captain, became the leader by default. The survivors, as they call themselves, went merc for a bit, striking at imps. But with the death of the Emperor, they reverted to their pirate ways, and the discipline Niv instituted has slackened. They are part of the Invids and have provided to Vera with some of her best clutch pilots. I stroked my goatee. He's always doing that. Anyone surviving the band's slaughter had to be a hot hand. I can see why Tavira is happy to have allied with them. Any idea where they are? I have a very good one. The Kumin system was too dangerous for them after the imps hit them, so they were basing themselves near their employers. Now, with Nal Hutta proving to be a place where some Invids are known to ship from, Niv and his people have gone back to Kumin, basing themselves on the fourth planet again. A number of other ships and crews have gone there too, which leads me to believe it is the new Invid base. I leaned on the back of the chair by Booster's desk. Most people deserted the world after the imps broke the pirates, right? Sure, all except those who couldn't afford passage or couldn't afford to be spotted on a more civilized world. With the pirates' return, the folks required to supply goods and services are flowing back there. Booster smiled. I figure we cruise in, threaten to vape a city, and get them to produce Mirax. I frowned. You aren't serious. Korn. The Iterman Bativ Pirate Company died when 2 Imp Victory-class destroyers hammered them. This is an Imp Star Deuce. The survivors'll cave. I don't think that's the plan we want to use, Booster. I shook my head slowly. I don't think they know where Mirax is, but I do think they're a space lane for getting there. Booster sat back, putting his big booted foot up on his desk. "So you think you'll just meander on in there, ask some questions, get some answers, and leave again? I don't believe it. No way your father could have had a kid who is so dumb." I suppressed a growl. First off, I'm not, and he didn't. Second, I don't lecture you on IFF transponders. You don't lecture me on infiltrating a criminal organization. Booster held his hands up. I'll grant you that you've got experience in hutting your way in where you aren't wanted. But these pirates aren't dewback drivers. They're hard and nasty and have all their bites in the right place and locked down tight. I don't know if they can outfly you, but most of them probably have as many combat hours as you do. They're close to the top of the Invid food chain, so walking in there will be tough. Then I'll just have to be tougher. I straightened up and gave him a wink. Don't worry, Booster. I know how to soften them up. I'll just bring Jacob Niv a big welcoming present, and he should be happy to see me. The fourth planet in the Q-Min system was called Corcus, for reasons known only to those who had settled it a long time ago. The largest city, Vlarna, toward which I flew, looked like the morning after of a party that had been interrupted by a sandstorm. The world itself was not entirely arid, though the section where Vlarna had been located really was. Irrigation and modern agricultural techniques had allowed farms to spring up in the area, but once the pirates left and the economy collapsed, the area had largely reverted to being a dust bowl. Still, it was the Dust Bowl that had spaceport facilities, so that was where I headed. I didn't bother to calm down for landing permits or berthing rights. I just did a flyby, picked a docking bay, and settled down into it. This seemed to alarm some individuals, but since that was the purpose of the exercise, I was pleased with the effect. I shut the Tinted Blue's main drive down, opened the gangway, then wandered out of the cockpit and settled into the premier cabin. I helped myself to a Lomanale, sat back, and watched the local holochannels on the entertainment monitor. Booster and I had discussed how the theft of the shuttle should be handled. I felt bad about taking it, but sending a message to Seoul to explain could have resulted in the search for it being called off. If the survivors learned that the shuttle hadn't been stolen, my cover would collapse. We settled on Booster getting word to my grandfather about what had happened, then my grandfather would decide how to proceed from there. It didn't take that long for several of the survivors to storm the ship with blasters drawn. I gave them a smile, raised my ale toward them, then drained my glass. They didn't seem to find this as amusing as I did, so they hauled me out of the shuttle and through the streets to a building that, despite the collapse of the East Wing, looked impressive enough to have once been very important. They took me up some stairs and around to a grand office, where I was unceremoniously plunked down in a chair, and my identification card was tossed onto a big desk. All but two of my escorts retreated to the door, leaving me alone with two men and a woman. The first man I recognized from files as Jacob Niv. Tall and well-built, with long blonde hair gathered into a thick braid, he looked very much the sort of dashing, handsome holograph of a pirate presented in entertainment media. As close as I was, I could see the dirt under his fingernails and the light scars on his face from battles past, but I still found the bright-eyed man somewhat engaging. I'd seen his type before and knew he could be quite charming. Next to him stood a woman about as tall as Lando Calrissian and much darker complected. She wore her black hair very closely cropped and had sharp, dark eyes. I didn't find her hard at all to look at, save that her right hand appeared to be a mechanical construct over which she wore no synthetic flesh. Its clicks as she worked a triangular credit coin back and forth between her fingers underscored her impatience. The third person seemed to be a reservoir for any impatience she could not burn off with her nervous habit. Taller than even Niv, making him a good head taller than me and probably 30% heavier, this guy was handsome and worse, had no doubt about it at all. His black hair had been cut to a middling length and was so dark that it almost appeared blue, though a shade of blue much darker than the icy hue of his eyes. He wore a mustache and goatee and had grown his mustaches out like wings that swept back along his cheeks. Niv looked at me, shooting the cuffs of his jacket. All three of them wore what had once been the uniform of the Ku-Min survivors. Gray jackets with red cuffs, collars and breasts, gold trim around the cuffs and down the seams of the gray pants, but their clothes had seen much better days. Repairs had been made with the big, obvious stitching in gold, as if to mark the scars on the body beneath the clothes. Given the amount of it on Niv's jacket, I was surprised he was still standing, and the stitchery circle around the woman's right elbow suggested how high her prosthesis went. The pirate leader slipped my ID data card into the data pad on his desk, read for a moment, then looked up. "You are foolish or suicidal, Geno Sedanian, coming here in that shuttle." "No, just incredibly bold." I settled an easy smile on my face and crossed my legs as if the pirates were in my office and not the other way around. "Your people went to certain lengths to get the shuttle, and I decided to deliver it." The dark man laughed. "And you think we will thank you for this?" After a split-second read of the other two's reactions to his speaking, I spitted him with a cold stare. "First, I don't believe that you, in particular, think at all." I deliberately looked back at Neve. I would apologize for the inconvenience I caused you, but the fact is that you caused me a greater inconvenience first. I needed to be well away from certain people, and your operation would have prevented my getting away. I could not let that happen, so I took the shuttle and escaped you. Niv's expression tightened. What happened to the 2 men who were supposed to be on board the shuttle? The smaller one is dead. He pulled a blaster on me, and I was constrained to kill him. The bigger guy is with friends of mine. If I don't report in on a timely basis, he will be killed. I opened my hands. You see, I'm not so foolish as you might think, or as your pal here, in his feeble dreams, might wish. Niv raised a hand and cut off his subordinate's protest. And why did you bring us the shuttle? I sat forward in the chair. Your operation impressed me. I've seen the Newsnet stories about the raid. The shuttle's escape wasn't even mentioned. You successfully looted the Pallet and Rainbow, and the New Republic did nothing, or could do nothing, to stop you. I was on the Pallet with those people. Palette, whatever it's called. So I know what sort of wealth you pulled out of them. An organization that can run such a big operation so smoothly has my admiration. It also can use my aid. The dark man couldn't contain himself. Your aid? Ha! We are Kumin survivors. We are the backbone of the Invid force. What in the Emperor's black heart makes you think we need you? I gave him a smile that was all teeth and in no way pleasant. I outflew you, didn't I? That brought a more conventional smile to the faces of Niv and the woman. She continued to work the coin through her fingers, though the pace had picked up. You thought you would offer your services to us as what? A pilot. The data card there will confirm I can pretty much fly anything you need flown. I've not driven one of the tri-fighters yet, but I can learn fast. She shook her head. I don't have a vacancy in my squadron. Make one. I jerked a thumb at the big guy. I can take Junior's place. In your dreams. My dreams, your nightmare. Niv laughed warmly, shattering the chill growing between the two of us. Not quite how we do things here at Danian. Captain Tyresi Gert here leads our elite squadron, Bolt Squadron. Members are elected to it based on performance when there is a vacancy. Lieutenant Raymart Sassu here has just been elected to fill the one vacancy in the squadron. Our Tri-Fighter wing does have 5 other squadrons, and there are vacancies in them. Perhaps, Raymart, Rock Squadron would like to have him. One more loser wouldn't hurt them. I again turned a smile loose on Raymart. I'm going to enjoy vaping your butt. No, Niv's voice took on an icy edge. The one thing you better understand about the survivors, Adanian, is this. We do not prey upon ourselves. Anyone who flies against or kills another pilot is brought up on charges, tried and executed. We aren't murderers like the Imperials. We are hard, yes, but we don't fear those who are part of us. I copy. I glanced at Raymart and knew I'd still watch my back. You'll want to check my records and get me tested on a tri-fighter, but you'll find I'm a hot hand on a stick. That could be. Niv raised a hand, and I heard the safety catches on blasters behind me being slipped off. First thing I have to know, though, is how you found us. Sensor data let me identify the backstab by its exhaust signature. A few more inquiries suggested that the survivors were returning here from Nal Hutta. I shrugged. Information about your relocation might not have been widespread, but it wasn't impossible to find either. I was owed some favors, so I used them. As it is, only the scanner records in the shuttle can tie you to the raid, and now you have them. Niv smiled. Except for the copy you left with the people you have holding Baril. Now that you mention it, I nodded. I'm not a stupid man. I hope not. Jacob Niv offered me his hand. If you are, coming here is likely the most stupid thing you have ever done. The good thing about that is it's also likely the last stupid thing you will ever do. Now, this is a pretty big trope in, crime fiction, is when the police officer guy has to, go undercover and, he or she has to coerce a criminal organization into hiring them and saying, you need me for this job. And it's always the case when, criminals should be way more suspect of this. This is a little too convenient. This guy just comes into our criminal operation and says, hey, you need to hire me, and then here's my piloting skills. It's it usually should so obviously be a plant. I mean, obviously, Korn is, awesome at what he does, and, it seems like he's, we can kind of have some dramatic license and assume that he's pulling it off because he's Korn Horn and he's so awesome. I just wanted to point out that trope that I've noticed a lot in other things. Anyways, chapter 34. The survivors might well have been the best of the Invids, but that wasn't saying much in the overall scheme of things. The denizens of Rock Squadron all struck me as what Rogue Squadron would have been had we lost to the Empire and spent our time dirt-side in seedy towns waiting for a chance to plunder pitiful folks who were worse off than we were. I'd been around more sullen and depressing people, but they were prisoners on the Lusankya with little hope of survival or rescue. Everyone grumbled and grunted when I was taken out to the hotel where the squadron was billeted and introduced. Nak Kek, Rock's leader, pointed me to a room in the hotel that had been well used before me. The curtains had been drawn tight, and I didn't mind that at all because I really didn't want a good look at the room itself. A wadded pile of bedclothes in the corner appeared to be where the previous occupant had laired, and if the stench from the refresher station was any indication, the previous occupant understood the room's purpose but hadn't got the hang of indoor plumbing. Keck watched me closely, preparing to judge me by my reaction to the room. The stubble on Keck's face bristled brown and gray, just like the thinning hair on his head. "It's the best we got." I shook my head. "It's the best you've got available." Keck smiled. "Yeah, that's it." "And that's not good enough." I walked down the hall and pounded on the next door. "Open up." A Shistavanian wolf woman tore the door open and snarled at me. She had white fur and pink eyes, and though a bit smaller than the other Shistavanians I'd met, she'd have ripped me to pieces in seconds. As she tore the door open, I also caught a whiff of her room and learned who had been living in the first room. I flashed her a big smile. "I'm your neighbor. Nice to meet you." Keck's booming laughter drowned out the Shistavanian's harshly whispered response. I nodded at the albino. Later, Keck shook his head, his brown eyes full of mirth. "Kate Schrovel will be your wingman. She's good, especially in void fights. Doesn't favor a lot of light." I pointed at the next door. "Better choice?" Keck shook his head. "Actually, I'm your best choice." I frowned at him. "You think I should take your room away from you?" The older man smiled slowly. "You could try, and you might succeed, but that would be insubordination and assaulting a superior officer, which is a capital offense with the Invids. You wouldn't live to reap the benefits of your station. Your best bet is to toss a few bits to some locals and have them clean the other room for you." "Think so?" "I figure you want to prove you're tough by kicking someone around, but I don't run the squadron that way. You kick someone's butt, take his room, he gets angry with you, causes discord in the unit, and someone has to be gotten rid of." Keck folded his arms around his chest. "You want to prove you're tough, knock someone from one of the other squadrons around, or better yet, someone from one of the other Invid companies here. In the survivors, the only thing that counts is your flying skill." I opened my arms wide. "Fine, let's go flying then." Keck nodded. "Thought you never ask." "I'll get someone to clean your room up while we're out at the training center." "How much?" He shrugged. "Let's see how good you are. If you're good enough that I want you rested to save my hide, I might even cover it for you." The survivors didn't have the sort of state-of-the-art training facility I was used to working in. Keck and I piled into a land speeder that took us out to an annex at the spaceport. He drove straight into the hangar and brought the dusty red vehicle to a stop beside two beat-up tri-fighters. All battered and scraped, close up they looked like giant versions of a child's toy, one that had seen a lot of rough play. Keck plucked a helmet from a wall rack and tossed it to me. "You take number 1 and I'll take Deuce. Comlink is built into the helmet. Listen to what I tell you to do and then do it. You've flown a TIE before, right?" I nodded. It was in simulation, but I figured that was close enough for this kind of stuff. "Weapons?" "Powered down targeting stuff. You figure you want to go at it a bit, I'll light you up just fine." I hauled myself up on the craft's ball cockpit and slid into it. The third fin barely allowed the hatch to open and made it kind of tough to get into the ship, but I managed anyway. Standing on the pilot's seat, I secured the top hatch, then dropped down and pulled on my helmet. I strapped myself into the chair and began to familiarize myself with the cockpit and controls. First thing I noticed was how roomy the cockpit seemed compared to that of a headhunter or X-Wing. The pod's spherical shape meant, naturally, there would be spare room. The spherical shape also meant it had no nose per se, which took a lot of getting used to. I felt as if I were strapped to an engine for my flights. The tie's steering yoke had been replaced with a stick that had a trigger, a targeting control knob, and a multi-position switch for shifting between weapon systems. The grip felt molded for my hand, and the stick itself had good but restricted play. I didn't think the craft would fly like an X-Wing, but the controls would feel similar, and that was a plus. The huge cockpit windscreen and peripheral panels provided a very good field of vision. The primary sensor monitor and two secondary monitors sat on a bar bisecting the windscreen disc, but really didn't interfere with what I could see. Throttle was on the left, though it operated by twisting a handle instead of pushing a stick forward. A smaller handle, similarly constructed, controlled the repulsor lift coils. The comm panel was also on the left, allowing me to access it without pulling my right hand off the stick. Shield controls were still on the right, however, which could make for some difficult decisions in the heat of combat. Etheric rudder pedals were down below the monitors. I clipped the lead from my helmet into the comms panel socket. Adanian here. Keck here. Lower right is your ignition sequence panel. Once all the lights are green, you are good to go. Head out on 10% power, bearing 026, and wait for me. I copy. I reached down and flicked all the switches, then waited for the system lights to cycle through red and yellow before going green. Once that happened, all the monitors sprang to life. I fed power into the repulsor lift coils and kept a steady hand on the stick. I twisted the throttle up to 10% power and guided the clutch forward until it broke out onto the ferrocrete expanse in front of the hangar. Once there, I tried out the rudder pedals and found the ship move pretty well to the right and left. It might not have been as maneuverable as the Interceptor, but had the X-Wing beat to stardust in that category. Keck brought his clutch out and raced it past mine, pulled the front up and jetted upward on a column of ion exhaust. It's not a land speeder, Adanian. We're pilots, not drivers. Get some atmosphere below you. I smiled and hit the throttle, as ordered, Rock Lead. I made my ascent more gradual, working upward in a spiral that let me assess power and maneuvering as I went. The Tri-Fighter, when compared to an X-Wing, really didn't come off that badly. Sensor range seemed a bit light, but without proton torpedoes or concussion missiles, the need to hit at extreme range vanished. The ship's rolls were a bit sluggish, but the climb rate was good and dive rate was impressive. Above all, though, the craft's agility impressed me. The rudder response allowed for quick shifts in which way the bow pointed. More importantly, the throttle and repulsor lift levers functioned in multiple ways. With the throttle pulling back on it would, in essence, shift the craft into neutral, killing thrust. The button on top of the lever would reverse thrust, so when it was lowered back down again, the engines would be blowing backward. With this quick cutout method of working, a maneuver like a reverse throttle hop wouldn't require chopping thrust back and pushing it up again, but just taking it offline. Likewise, the repulsor lift coils could be left with a power setting in place, but pulled offline until needed. Crank back the throttle, cut in the coils, and the clutch could dance. Clearly the invids I'd faced before were not the best available. Keck wasn't bad, and I showed him that I was no nerf herder either. After he guided me through the basics, we played some tag. He got the better of me by a narrow margin, but what seemed to impress him was that the score was so low. You're not easy to hit, you know, Adanian. I copy, lead. I laughed aloud as we came in on our return approach to the training facility. Promotes longevity. It's good you think that way. We've got a mission. A mission? I coughed lightly and, raising my hand reflexively, bounced it off the helmet's faceplate. I've logged what, all of an hour on this beast? Better than some of the pilots with the Red Nova crew. They ran into Rogue Squadron a couple of months back and got hammered pretty damn hard. I heard a low chuckle. Don't worry, we won't be doing anything like that this time out. Just a simple loot and scoot. I cut my throttle out and brought the repulsor lift coils online as we neared the hangar. The Invidious going to be with us? Nope, this is personal business, Keck laughed harshly. Won't be that lucrative, but will feel very good. The mission, it turned out, had its roots in the Imperial assault on the Eterman Bativ pirates, the attack that reduced them to the sorry company known as the Kumin Survivors. The Imperial Victory-class destroyers Bombard and Crusader had killed over 97% of the pirates, leaving them with a backstab and a handful of fighters. The survivors had sworn they would avenge themselves on the captains of those two destroyers, and one, Captain Zlis Unar, had obtained passage on the Galaxy Chance. Someone on Chance had decided that selling Unar out was a better bet than anything being offered in the onboard casino, and word got to Niv. The Chance was a Corellian corvette that a rival of Booster's had outfitted as a miniature version of the errant venture. I think Booster would have ignored Chance except for one thing. The owner had painted it bright red. Booster had wanted to do that with the errant venture, but nowhere in the galaxy could he find enough red paint to do the job. In fact, the only color available in sufficient quantity at reasonable prices was Star Destroyer white, a fact that Booster considered proof that the Emperor had been out to annoy him personally all along. To describe the briefing we got before heading out as marginal is to code up a new definition for the word. I got slapped into third flight with Kate and two other females, both human. I got the designation Rock 9 purely by chance, but that was good since I would answer to it almost reflexively. Our flight was given the task of flying cover while the other two rock flights neutralized Chance's weaponry and eliminated the four uglies. TIE wings, it was speculated. Backstab would carry us to the site, and a ski prey blast boat would go over and pluck Unar from the Chance. The other flights got the shot at Chance because they were all true survivors, not just folks who had joined later like me. It struck me that a mission of such importance would have been a natural for Bolt Squadron, but I was informed that Niv had drawn a squadron for the honor at random. I had no doubt Remart was regretting his shift to Volt Squadron. I got the impression that none of the other pilots in Rock Squadron were sorry to see him gone, and more than a few thought his discomfort of being left out was rather delicious. We got shuttled up to the backstab and went EV to get into our fighters. Like TIE fighters, the Tri-Fighters had no atmosphere or life support equipment, requiring us to carry our own. This made going EV and crawling up over the hull to get into our ships less difficult than if X-Wing pilots were to try it. I made it in, secured my hatch, powered up, and checked in. Others did likewise, but in no way was there very much calm discipline called for or observed. The backstab went to light speed, made one interim trip, and then headed off toward where the Chance was supposed to be. Our trip took a full 3 hours, and for the first time I really appreciated the extra room in the cockpit. I would have appreciated even more having atmosphere in there so I could remove my helmet, have something to eat, and maybe catch a nap. While the cockpit did afford me excellent visibility, there isn't that much to see in hyperspace. On that flight, I realized how much I actually missed Whistler. I know people aren't supposed to get sentimental about astromech droids, but I'd had him for years. He used to get the usual memory wipes and programming upgrades back then, but I think he found a way to download chunks of his personality into the Corsac mainframe and recover it later. Whistler was sneaky and independently minded that way, which was good for me. If not for him, I'd been dead a dozen times over. On long flights, Whistler and I would discuss various things, like fatherhood, and I could count on him as being a good sounding board. Actually, he was very much a mirror in the sense of my father's old saying. When I started getting out of line, Whistler would call me on it, and more times than not, he was right. Of those few times he was not right, well, I'm sure there were times when he was not right. The backstab reverted to real space right on top of Chance. Flights 1 and 2 deployed, taking slashing runs at the Corvette. Rock 4 exploded when she caught a direct hit from one of the ship's double-turbo laser cannons. The green energy bolts just peeled the cockpit back like the petals of a flower bud, shredding it and casting long, jagged tendrils of armor into space. The clutch's ion engine exploded, letting the craft's 3 fins spin away through space. The rest of the Chance's cannons filled space with a lot of energy, but Rock 4 was the only thing Chance's gunners hit before we slagged their guns. The 6 TIE wing fighters flying sentry duty around Chance should have run as soon as we arrived. The TIE wing consists of a TIE fighter ball cockpit married to the engine nacelles from a Y-wing fighter. It truly lives up to the name Ugly, and in Rogue Squadron we used to refer to them as Die Wings. Sluggish and ungainly, they look like wilder nerfs being hit by a pride of Te Pare. Okay. All 6 lasted no more than 5 minutes. I found watching the dogfight frustrating because my squadron mates missed shots that should have ended it all much sooner, and 2 of them paid for their lousy marksmanship with their lives. The skip ray that had come with us, Vibroblade, started over toward Chance when another ship, a private yacht, entered the system on our entry vector. That wasn't a surprise. I didn't know where we were, but there were enough planetary bodies in the area that routes in and out had to be severely limited. What was a surprise was the half-dozen hyperdrive-fitted headhunters flying cover for the yacht. They clearly didn't like seeing us there, so while the yacht came about and headed away again, the headhunters came in on us hard with enough triple blasters blazing. I didn't wait for an order releasing me. 10 on me. I snapped through the comm and engaged my throttle. The clutch lurched forward. I rolled and dove toward the headhunters, and 2 came up at me. With my thumb, I flicked the weapon selector over an ion cannon, hit a little rudder to flash the incoming pilots my flank, then straightened the clutch out and pulled the trigger. The blue ion bolt nailed the lead headhunter's left S-foil. Azure lightning played across the forward shield, boiling it away. The shield didn't collapse, but the lightning storm on the shield made it tough for the pilot to see me. His return shots went wide on either side. Then we were past each other before he could get another shot. Kate shot at the second headhunter. Her twin laser blasts caught the headhunter on the nose, piercing the shield and causing a brief flash of light. Even without Whistler present to let me know what happened, I knew from the location that the headhunter had lost its combat sensor package. The pilot would be blind in space and in a dogfight situation. That meant he was as good as dead. I snapped a quick shot off at another headhunter, then popped my throttle off and pulled back on the stick. I cut the throttle to half, re-engaged it to complete the half loop, then ran it up again and rolled out to port. That dropped me on the tail of one of the headhunters that was running in on 11. I pumped 2 iron bolts into the headhunter's aft shield. The first shot took the aft shield down, and the second played over the length of the ship. Sparks shot from the engine cowlings. Unless the pilot could get a restart going, he was done. Red gold blaster bolts lit my shields from starboard. I hit right rudder and swung the clutch's tail out of the headhunter's line of attack. The next bolt streaked past on the port side, so I rolled to starboard, dove and curled up in a long loop. Rolling out to port, I saw another headhunter making a run on Kate. The pilot was intent on her, so I came in on an oblique angle and hit with my first shot. That took his aft shield down, so he rolled starboard to get away from me. I applied a lot of left rudder, swung my nose around, and laced his port S-foil with another bolt. His blaster on that side exploded, and the ship started to roll, which told me vector jets on that side were also having trouble. I rolled to starboard and would have swooped in to finish him, but a glance at my tactical sensor screen showed me a headhunter vectoring in on me, and I had a feeling that was the guy who tried to get me earlier. I held my roll slow and showed him my belly, then yanked back on my stick and started a dive. He rolled to set himself up to come after me, and I knew I had him. I cranked my throttle down to 30%, then reversed it, killing my momentum. I let it hang there for 3 seconds, then dialed thrust back up. As I did so, my headhunter friend went streaking past me, and I dropped into his exhaust. My first shot nailed his rear shield. He broke right, so I climbed, inverted, and ruddered my way back onto his tail. Kate raced past and pumped 2 laser blasts into him. One collapsed the aft shield, and the other holed his starboard S-foil. His roll slowed appreciably and became unstable as the vector jets and the damaged S-foil weren't matching the output from the other side. The pilot just goosed his throttle forward to get away since he couldn't fly fancy anymore. The headhunter even had enough speed to outrun my clutch. Outrunning an ion bolt, on the other hand, is a lot harder. My shot caught his ship dead on in the back. Little blue tendrils of electricity ran over the fighter like nightmare fingers, scratching out sparks and little puffs of vapor. The ship shut down immediately, continuing off on its course. I saw Kate coming back around for another run on it, but I called her off. Abort, 10, he's done. Not dead. Out of the battle, leave him. I triggered an ion blast that passed between her fighter and the stricken ship. You can have the kill, but there's no reason to kill a pilot just doing his job. Right to kill is mine. She snapped her words off as if in pain. Do not deny me. You owe me. I shucked the one on your butt. I started my clutch forward, angling in on her. He's mine, and I want him alive. I heard Niv's voice come through on the tactical frequency. All targets are neutralized. Stand down, Flight Rock 3. I copy, I reported. Copy. Kate snarled, did not have me looking forward to talking with her after the mission returned home. 9. Go to Tactical 2 and scramble. As ordered, sir. I switched the comm unit over to the secondary tactical frequency and hit the scramble switch. The encryption key, which had been uploaded to each fighter from the backstab, would keep the conversation private between Niv and me. 9 here, Captain. Nice shooting, 9. Why Ion? You could have killed the headhunters in one shot the way you fly, but you used Ion and made it tougher. Niv let a little anger drift into his voice. Was this a game for you? No, sir. I paused for a moment, not so much to gather my thoughts as figuring out how to express them. The headhunter pilots were just doing their jobs. If we killed them, we're just butchers and killers, and any bodyguards in the future know they should go after us with full because we're going to vape them. The yacht was gone. Chance can pick these guys up, and next time we give them an opportunity to back off, they will. Maybe, Niv paused. Makes sense, of course, but few things in warfare ever do. Worth taking a chance if no one dies. Niv snorted. You that squeamish? I've got my share of debtors logged in my accounts, Captain. If I can get it without blood, I think it's better. I shook my head. If that's not thinking that's welcome here, I can just take my shuttle and leave. No need for that. Some of the tension in Niv's voice eased. That kind of thinking is more than welcome here. You're one of us now, Adanian, one of the Invids. Let's hope more of you rubs off on us than the other way around. That is, of course, another trope of the undercover officer is always when a cop who's undercover is put in a situation where the bad guys are going to kill someone, and then the hero, the cop, has to be like, no, don't kill that person, and then they have to make up some sort of reason that would make sense to the bad guys, like, oh, don't kill him because of this, he's we knocked him out. We don't. I don't want another murder charge on my head. I don't want any part of killing this person. Again, Corran backs up his reasoning with logic and things that make sense, but still, it's kind of suspicious in an undercover situation. But maybe that's just me. Chapter 35. Kate and I did have words on our return to Kumin 4. Well, not words exactly, but the scars healed within 2 weeks, and you can't notice the one on my right cheek unless I get a deep tan. 2 weeks have gone by. Even before the physical evidence of our fight had gone away, however, Kate voted with 4 other of Rock Squadron survivors to make me the leader of a new 3 flight. Keck helped me choose 3 pilots to fill it, and Kate moved into first flight to replace Rock 4. Over the next month, I spent a lot of time with my new recruits, drilling them. Now a month has gone by. I'd gone through the same routine countless times before with new pilots coming into Rogue Squadron, but I found Rock Squadron to be the dark side of what I had known with the Rogues. In terms of discipline, Kumin 4 made Yavin 4 look like Lusankya. Trying to instruct hungover pilots is about as tough as teaching a Rancor to sing and dance, and the Rancor's attitude about the whole process would probably be better. The pilots in my squad clearly thought they could fly, and while they were not bad, they weren't up to the level I wanted. I was responsible for their lives, and I had no desire to go into a fight with undertrained pilots who would die and leave me alone out there. The best of the lot was Timsur, a tall woman who wore her hair very short and very blonde. Her temper was about as short as her hair, and she initiated a couple of cantina-clearing brawls when she wandered into the Warren, which is where the Red Nova crew and Rystar's raiders tended to hang out. There was little love lost between those groups and the survivors, and Timsur's status as an ex-raider didn't help ease the tension there. In a tri-fighter, she had a good sense of what was going on around her and had a knack for hitting on deflection shots. Over the first months with the survivors, I spent most of my time dirt down in Vlarna, which is about as thrilling as it sounds. The days got hot enough that most folks spent their time in the semi-sunken cantinas that served as informal squadron homes. The survivors primarily hung out at the crash cantina. The decor was rather ghoulish. Pilots would bring in bits and pieces of debris from kills or from crashes they'd survived. Chunks of transparasteel or quadanium alloy hung from the ceiling and in the dim light presented navigational obstacles for even folks as small as I am. Timsur actually gashed her forehead in there before she got used to negotiating the debris maze. I visited the crash regularly, but tended to spend a fair amount of my free time wandering through Vlarna. Aside from the aviary, the Indig's name for the district where the pilots tended to reside, Vlarna looked like pretty much any other marginal town dependent on spaceport trade for its survival. The fields outside of town grew enough fresh vegetables that the prices for them weren't wholly outrageous. Vlarna had no native industries. Cantinas and gambling establishments don't really scan that way to me, save for a local brewery that turned out a decent Loman Ale-type product. It was good enough, in fact, that all 7 of the pirate crews working out of Varna declared it, and the fields where it grew the things that went into the ale, a no-fly zone to reduce the chances of an aerial accident destroying it. At night, when things began to cool off and the twin moons came up, I liked walking through the streets. Varna had a small town feel to it. While the spaceport had been built to imperial specifications, the city itself had been crafted by local masons and workers using a lot of native material. The streets twisted and turned, snaking through narrow canyons with buildings on both sides, then opening out into small squares that had fountains in the center. The lack of a lot of municipal lighting meant most alleys were sunk in pitch blackness at night. But this was Varna, so alleys weren't too dangerous unless you were wandering through the aviary. Kate Schrovel occasionally joined me while I wandered. Her condition made her very sensitive to light, so if she came out during the day, she wore a cloak that completely covered her and donned goggles dark enough to turn noon into the void of space. While she was very private, I did learn that she considered her albinism the fault of the Empire, since her mother had once been used in some sort of experiment by Imperial scientists. The survivors were known to have a strong hatred for the Empire, so she had come to them and endured life on the Corcus for the chance to shoot up Imperials. Through her, I also discovered how Raymart Sasru had been voted out of the unit and into Bolt Squadron. She and I were seated back in one of the crash's darker corners, comparing data on our flight's performances in a series of exercises, when Raymart sauntered over toward our table. He came on slow, with a deliberate gait that allows his hips and shoulders to swivel slowly. It was definitely a strut. He was there to be seen, and seen as stalking prey. He wore his gray uniform trousers, black boots, and a sleeveless gray tunic that had to be about 4 sizes too small because it was tight enough to show off every muscle and rib he possessed. He gave me a cold smile. Spending time with her? Watch you don't get ticks. I looked up from my ale mug. Funny, she says she hasn't been bothered since you bolted. Coincidence? Can't be. Raymart looked at me a bit surprised. He'd intended the jibe to sting Kate, but I deflected it. I could feel the anger rising in her and traces of fear in there too, but didn't know why. I did decide real quickly, however, that she didn't need to be provoked and that I could prevent it. I slid my chair back noisily. What's the matter, Sasru? You offer a smart remark and can't handle a reposit? Or did my comment go over your head? Let me explain it then. See, she hasn't been bothered by vermin since you went away from Rock Squadron. That means, in my opinion, you're a carrier of vermin. Does that break it down enough for you? Shock widened Remart's blue eyes. Then he recovered himself and posted his gloved hands on his hips. He laughed aloud, filling the sound void in the room. Trust a Corellian to lead with his mouth and to venture in where he is not wanted. I stood. What, no quick shot about how Corellians have no use for odds, so they don't know when they're stacked against them? No joke about the most famous Corellian being named Solo because no Corellian will trust another Corellian? What other unoriginal and older than the Empire slur could you have offered? Oh yes, how about suggesting that Leia Organa took up with a Corellian because, hey, after the destruction of Alderaan, she had nothing else to lose? I moved out from behind the table. How about this one? How many Corellians does it take to change a glow panel? I glanced at Timster sitting at another table, but she shrugged. None. If the room's dark, you can't see Corellians cheating at Sabak. That brought some laughter from the surrounding tables, and even Kate began to relax. You know why so many Corellians used to get caught and sent to Kessel? Remart's eyes narrowed. Because they were stupid? No, they were lonely for the rest of their family. I snapped my fingers at him. Come on, Remart. You gotta be quicker than that. A Corellian bought a neck as a pet, but it was so stupid it kept running into walls. What did he name it? The taller man shook his head. Remart. I smiled as I took a step toward him. He couldn't think of a stupider name. Because of the Force, I knew Remart's right fist was coming even before he knew he was going to throw it. I twisted slightly to my own right and brought my head around so the punch didn't land with full impact. I still felt it. It worked my jaw around good, but it didn't drop me to the floor the way it should have. I turned my head slowly back toward him and smiled. By the Emperor's black bones, you hit like a Shadrafan. No report this time. I waved him away contemptuously and started back toward my table. Come back some other time after you learn how to throw a punch. I felt him coming at my back, So I turned quickly to the right and stepped laterally toward him, directly along his line of attack. I hit him with a stiffened finger blow square in the throat. He gurgled and staggered back, more surprised than hurt, and struggled to stay up on his feet. He backed a few more steps, then leaned heavily on a table with two other bolt pilots seated at it. I noted with satisfaction that they sidled away from him. I pointed at him. I gave you one punch for free. Never again. You leave me and the rest of Rock Squadron alone. You aren't part of it anymore. So what we do is of no concern to you. You say anything to my people beyond asking permission to get your disgusting form out of their sight, and we'll have it out, you and I. You understand that? Without waiting for an answer, I looked at the other two bolts at that table. Get him out of here. I've got your tab, and tell Captain Gert I'll speak with her on this matter at her convenience. I returned to my chair and pulled it back to the table. I picked up my ale mug, drank, then kept it in front of my mouth as I glanced at Kate. Hope you didn't find that embarrassing. I know you could have taken him. The white Shistavanian shook her head, and one of her ears rotated in my direction. Gallant, grateful. I noticed the fibroplast table had little curls of material where her claws had gouged parallel furrows down to the edge. Old foe, never learned no. I nodded and drank some more, killing the dryness in my mouth and throat. I'm surprised you voted him into the bolts. Couldn't kill him, so we got him out that way. Kate regarded me carefully. He was a bully and animal. Ketch was afraid. Remart wanted fame, money, power. He was good pilot, so didn't die. Good enough for bolts, so he sent him. I lowered my mug. His coming back here to pick on you means the bolts aren't putting up with his antics. Why did he come for you? She glanced down and a low growl rolled from her throat. I raised my left hand. It's okay. I don't need to know. Kate stood and pulled her cloak on. Walk. As ordered, I drained my ale, then walked over to Timsur and handed her a stack of mismatched coins. You get my tab, the bolts tab, and one round for the rocks, right? I copy. Timsur gave me a quick smile. Nice work there, Jen. Don't try to repeat it, I winked at her. And 3 Flight will be at the training center at dawn, and you'll have my change. I followed Kate out into the cool night, and we began wandering aimlessly, though the growl in my stomach told me I'd want some food soon. Nice night, isn't it? She nodded and peered off at the dueling crescent moons. Peace. Nice to know peace, son. I'd like to hope someday there will be more peace than war in the galaxy. With that dream, you were in wrong place. Her lips peeled back in a grin, flashing lots of white teeth. No peace from Remart. I shrugged. He's sneaky and deep down a coward. I'm not worried about him, though. He came for me because he broke me. Kate fell silent after that admission, and I thought she'd used up her quota of words for the day. I let the silence hang between us, not pressing, because I knew she'd say nothing more. It was almost as if she were resting up after the ordeal of making so open a statement and preparing to be battered by me for it. A couple of blocks later, down curving hilly streets that took us well away from the aviary, she spoke again. Charmed me. He became friend. He sat with me in the dark. He did not draw me out like you. He worked his way in. I frowned. What did he want? Possession. I am apart from everyone, isolated. Because of your photosensitivity? And raising. My mother was the only Shistavanian I knew young. She hesitated, groping for words. When he came to Uvena 3, she was home. I was in new place. My scent was not right. You understand? You were different. It became easy for others to pick on you. I reached out gently and rested my left hand on her right shoulder. You let Remart know this, and he turned it against you. False friend, made demands. I could feel tension start her body trembling, but she quelled it quickly. I rejected him. He beat me, badly. Fear and pain. I was happy to vote him out. I gave her shoulder a little squeeze. Your confidence is safe with me. I know. She turned toward me, and I saw a crescent moon reflected in her eyes. You hide pain's secrets, too. I blinked. How do you know? I am Shistavanian enough to read sign. Her grin returned. You walk alone. You do not visit, seek companionship. You do not drink more than is needed to make you fit in. I gave her a quick smile. Quite the detective. Of what am I guilty? You have lover away. You look for reunion or redemption. That stopped me. You're a very good tracker. So, I think. Why are you here? She sniffed twice, quickly. Your lover is not an invid. I shook my head, wondering how close to the truth I could come without jeopardizing my entire mission. I decided I had to skirt the truth by a wide margin, but quickly built up a story that would suffice. Her cousin controls the Tinta line and has decreed that my lover cannot be with me without having her whole branch of the family cut off from the Tinta fortune. I am greasier than hut slime in her eyes, and consider to be after my lover's wealth alone. I want to destroy the Tintas, and I see being an invid as the way to do it. I want them to know I am the instrument of their destruction, and I want to have their wealth in my pockets when I take my lover away from her poverty-stricken family. Kate sniffed once more, then gave out with a sharp yip. Fools fight for love, the wise for money. Thanks, I think. Bold plan. You will need to be true invid to accomplish it. I caught a whiff of something cooking from further down the street and headed toward it. What do you mean by true invid? Crew on ship. She fell into step with me. 2 ways. Merit in combat. That can be done. Not as rock. We are ignored. Bolts are not. A playful growl rolled from her throat. Bolt you can become. I hope so. What's the other method? Birth duty. I shook my head. I don't understand. Kate reached out and caught my chin in her right hand. She turned my face to the left and nodded. Minimal scar, you might do. Excuse me? Another yip. Admiral Tavira has appetite for men. You can become true invid that way, too. I nodded, and she released my chin. Becoming a true invid and joining the crew of the Invidious was the final step in locating Mirax. As a crew member, I learned where the Imstar went between attacks. I knew at that location I would find Mirax. I would do what it took to get there and save her. I had no doubt in my mind. So, Kate, tell me, I smiled as I waved her toward the small restaurant from which the scent of food emanated. Just what do we have to do to make me a bolt? End of chapter 35. So, what Corin did in the bar, I thought that was really cool. I enjoyed that. What I'm sort of not enjoying from this section is, it does make sense that he's, going undercover and infiltrating, these bad guys. He wants to get to Mirax. But again, there's these time jumps. It's like, well, 2 weeks go by, a month goes by, and he's being an undercover bad guy for weeks and months, and all these months are going by, and Mirax is still missing out there in stasis somewhere, and he's just letting weeks and months go by. I mean, it's obviously necessary, I guess, but it's a little frustrating. Anyway, that's it for today. I'll see you next time for more of iJedi.